We talk about organizational culture and the importance of getting culture right, aligned with values, principles, and morals. Here's a controversial subject. Whether you're a business owner or an employee inside a large enterprise, one thing that is going to come up is politics, according to Peter Drucker, Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. So having a strong, vibrant culture is really important for the kinds of relationships and the alignment of values and principles within an organization. The more your culture can be informal, the less politics are required in order to ensure that the whole enterprise works well. That's why I am a very big proponent of having small independent companies. I think small businesses, particularly very small micro-sized enterprises, have a vital role to play in the economy. And one should never be judged in terms of the size of your organization. But coming back to politics, right? So let's take the example of a slightly larger company. You've got 50 plus employees, you've got multiple departments in the organization. This is where politics and the political landscape starts to become important because it is impossible to have a totally self-governing organization. In other words, having all of the decisions being made by all of the participants at the same time. This is a challenge because if you are not mindful of how things are organized politically, so in other words, what is your constitutional framework within your company? In other words, what are the rules and how the values, principles, and the cultural norms are codified in terms of how we decide to govern and to be governed, okay? And who's accountable and who is subordinate versus who is leader. All of those things matter when you start to become large enough to have a political system within your organization. And, as in real life, if we look at, most of the world today, man, a lot of the politics that we have today really sucks. Look at the country that I have made home in the last 25 years, France. It has been very hard when there is no clear winner in terms of elections to actually then have a government that is appointed correctly. And so compromises have to be made. But the one thing that does matter is that there is a constitutional framework that sets the overall rules on how institutions function and how the delegation of power is meant to work and what checks and balances exist in the political system. And therein lies something really important, which is what are your checks and balances when you design an organization that is going to have delegated power, delegated decision-making, and reciprocal accountability and clear leadership. And you know what? This is quite hard. So I came across a Harvard Business Review article a while back, and I found it again and wanted to highlight this because I think it's useful in the context of mapping and understanding your current political climate and political landscape within your organization. So there are four main types as per this article. So are you either in the weeds? Are you on the rocks? Or are you in the woods? Or are you on the high ground? So let me say that again. Are you in the weeds? Are you on the rocks? Are you in the woods? Or are you on the high ground? See, when you're stuck in the weeds, it's because there has been only informal politics inside the organization. So things have kind of grown organically and without clear cultivation. So this means that individuals rely on other individuals, and a lot of that politicking becomes very twisted, very much like how weeds proliferate in a garden. When it comes to the rocks, this is where you have some kinds of formalities, but they are individual power plays, where you've had the emergence of dominant figures who have staked out their authority and have taken authority by force almost. Now, when you have rocks and you're on the rocks, it becomes very hard because you are challenging dominant power positions that have been taken without some kind of coherent constitutional arrangement in place. Okay. So it's like having mini dictators out there. When you have, then the third case now is when we have the woods, right? And the woods, where you can get lost in the woods, is where you have unspoken rules of engagement, unspoken politics, things that have become de facto and that are not out in the open. And this could be a very treacherous environment where it is very difficult to then find your way out of the woods, because we know what we can say out loud, but there's this unspoken code, if you like. And that can also make it very difficult to drive meaningful change. Okay. And then, of course, the last one, which is the desired option that you have, is to be on the high ground, where there is actually a constitution and a constitutional framework. There are some clear checks and balances that have been designed into the system, where leadership is clear and respect is earned. And again, the ability to have engagement, right, particularly when it comes to reviewing the political order and driving change, where that is also part of that high ground constitutional arrangement. So we have to think about, what are our different arrangements for power, for counterpower, checks and balances, and also how do these arrangements actually allow for true participation in reshaping the Constitution when it is required. One problem that we have in Western societies and in advanced economies today, right? If we look at what we call the West, we look at the United States, Canada, North America, we look at Western Europe, and we can see that a lot of folks are very proud of Constitution and are very clear to defend the Constitution as it was formulated, but are very nervous and are also unwilling to engage in constitutional dialogue when it comes to doing true constitutional reform. Now, maybe I see things a little bit differently because I come from South Africa, and South Africa is one of the rare examples of a country that went through a major political shift exactly 30 years ago in the mid-1990s. 1994 was when we had the first democratic elections. And there was an entire process on figuring out and effectively replacing an old constitution with a brand new constitution. It's one of the most progressive and modern constitutions in the world. And it provides some very clear checks and balances. But a constitution is not enough, because where we have dysfunction in my country of origin is because the actual implementation of the constitutional principles in the form of institutions, in the form of actual civil society and citizen participation in day-to-day life, that is lacking. And so again, to be engaged, right, means that you have to play your part, whether you are a citizen, whether you are an elected official, whether you are appointed by an official, and whether you are, again, part of a legislative process, or whether you're part of a administrative process or a judicial process. If you think about that in countries in society today, and you look at a private enterprise, a corporation will have similar structures, which are, again, legislative, like making rules, administrative, obviously operating and ensuring that that framework is serving customers well and delivering the results that customers desire. And then the third, obviously, is judicial, where you obviously have the ability to dispense the law in the case of, let's say, some kind of error or fault that occurs. How do you have redress? Inside an organization, when you have employees, you often look at human resources and personnel departments as that kind of like judge within the internal teams. And then the other one that acts often as a judge is supply chain when it comes to procurement and sourcing and dealing with external vendors. Now, this is where things really get terribly toxic inside large corporations, where you have supply chain on one side squeezing and setting very weird rules on how vendors are engaged, and you have human resources on the other trying to define like how employees, but also how subcontractors. And for those of you that do freelance work, I mean, this is something that absolutely about, because you're being told you have to follow the same personnel rules as employees do, but you've got supply chain on your back squeezing you in terms of your day rate. But that's another topic for another time. And anyway, I just wanted to share a few thoughts about political landscape and also these 4 types of organizational politics that can be found. And take a look at your organization that you work in, particularly those of you that work in a larger corporation or those that have customers which are large corporations. What type of politics play out in that organization? Are you in the weeds? Are you on the rocks? Are you in the woods? Or are you on the high ground? If this resonated with you, leave a comment. Grab a link down below, download the document, and comments welcome.